Good morning, everybody. I'm Sonia Luz Gomez Medina from Florencia, Caquetá. And today is a pleasure can interview one of the best teachers from the municipality of Florencia. And his name is Hans Humberto Oviedo Gomez, but I prefer that he introduce himself. Let's go to pay attention.
Okay, my name is Hans Humberto Oviedo Gomez. I am an English teacher. I developed my undergraduate studies as licenciado en Inglés and administrador de empresas. I additionally studied a specialization in gerencia estratégica de mercadeo. And finally, I got my master's degree in English didactics, and I'm working at two different levels, at a state school and at a state university. I'm working as a full-time teacher at the Institución Educativa Barrios Unidos del Sur from 8th to 11th grade with English, of course, and I'm working at a state university that is Universidad de la Amazonia with the courses Pedagogical Research 2 and Academic Writing.
Teacher, what do you think is the relationship between language and culture?
Language and culture are closely related, and we cannot conceive language as separated from culture and culture as separated from language. Why? Because language is the way in which we communicate and understand the world, and culture is the one that shapes language based on the different regions. As you know, we have some linguistic patterns. For example, Spanish is spoken in different countries, but different countries have different cultural traits and understandings that shape the way people communicate and use the language. So we cannot conceive both of them as separated items because they are correlated and each one of them shapes the other.
What do you consider is the influence of culture in the process of a foreign language process?
Of course, culture has a great influence in the learning of a language, and especially in this case when there is a new language or when English is conceived as a second language. We have previously experienced that when we try to learn from the culture of others and a new language, we take parts of that culture to be taught inside the English classroom. However, there are some mistakes in the way we are addressing this issue. As you know, the role of culture in learning is a core element in the education nowadays. There are different scholars that have talked about this, such as Byram, Cranch, Byram and Risager, Oviedo and Alvarez, etc. And they affirm that any of those aspects, language and culture, can be conceived as separated or isolated parts of learning and teaching. In this sense, Cranch affirms also that a cultural reality represents cultural identities. So, when we talk about language, we cannot conceive or understand that that culture or that one culture prevails to another. But we have to keep in mind that both cultures are really important and both of them have cultural patterns that have to be preserved. So that is the way to address culture. It is not talking about having one culture that is superior to others, but how to understand, to know the different conceptions and understandings of the world based on the different cultures.
Which cultural expression do you know countries have through language?
Well, when we talk about cultural expressions, we need to understand that every single action represents a cultural expression. Why? Because I have a cultural background that is always in me, and I try to use and show my understanding and conceptions of the world based on my cultural identity, my cultural background. Based on that, it is impossible to conceive that every single action can be a political action or a social action, but also a cultural action. And remember that when we talk about languages, and in this case, how to communicate, it is not only through verbal communication. There is a part that is non-verbal communication or body language, and this is also reflected and understood as part of cultural realities.
Our next question is, why do you think it's important to have an oral tradition in a country?
Well, I personally think oral traditions are immersed in our way of being, our behavior, and every single aspect of our communication, because oral tradition represents the way in which generations transmit information to other generations. And this is really important because we have to think about cultures as the way to preserve my own culture by understanding and having in mind the culture of others. So it is necessary to acknowledge that the other cultures are important and I need to understand them, to conceive them, but by trying to preserve my own. This is the reason why oral traditions are necessary and important in our society.
Excellent answer, teacher. Now, what do you think? Do we teach language using culture or do we teach culture using language?
Well, I'd like to summarize this part by having in mind an author that is really important for cultural aspects and the development of the intercultural communicative competence. In this sense, Strasbourg in 2010 affirms that language is culture and culture is language. That is a really interesting a quotation that I found, and he also affirms that culture and language are intertwined, so connected and shape each other. In this sense, I cannot conceive, as I previously stated, that language can be separated from culture or culture from language. Why? Because when we talk about the different realities, the different conceptions of beauty, the different ways of understanding the world, we also have cultural background that it is impossible to to conceive those languages, the learning of a language, without or leaving aside the cultural patterns of a country, of a region, of a specific context.
Perfect. And finally, do you take into account culture in the strategies you use in your English classes? Please, can you give some examples, please?
Well, in my case, I have to confess that I'm really working on this field because this is one of my research lines. I have developed some research in relation to this concern, in relation to cultural aspects, cultural content, the development of the communicative, intercultural communicative competence, and of course, EFL learning. As I work at two different levels, I have developed some studies, some strategies, some research ideas in relation to this issue. In my classes or lessons at school, I try to integrate the different conceptions of beauty and the different ways to understand the world in different countries, but also and trying to emphasize on the fact that the own culture is also necessary. As others conceive beauty, for example, I have my own conceptions of beauty, and both of them are necessary to be understood, to conceive, and to live in this globalized world. Additionally, I developed a research study in my master's degree when I tried to look or explore the contributions that EFL lessons with cultural content have on undergraduates from the ELT program at Universidad de la Amazonia. This was a research study that was evaluated as meritorious by the university where I studied my master's, and it was interesting to acknowledge and to know that including and the inclusion of cultural content inside the EFL lessons is necessary as students feel comfortable, identified, and comfortable to understand the conceptions that others have about the world, but also having in mind the own. In that case, and in that specific example, we work with the culture from the United States of America and also from here from Colombia. And we have both perspectives, but leaving aside the way of perceiving that the other culture is superior to mine, but taking into account both of them and which were the positive aspects in relation to different concerns such as the electoral system, economical support, health, etc., and how they are conceived and treated in each one of the regions. This part is important to affirm that culture and language are related, as we have stated before, and that it is necessary to continue working and including aspects of culture inside the EFL lessons as teachers or future teachers.
Fantastic answer, teacher. Eh, I have to say thank you for your participation in this interview, and I wish we can work in a future because both we are working here in Florencia.
Okay, thank you for this interview. It was a pleasure to be with you, teacher Sonia, and
Thank
a
you for
hug and see
having me.
you later. Bye
Bye.
bye.